Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching 72 News. This is Shoaib Zaidi, and this is our today's weekly shows. We discuss about our farmers, our futures. Mr. Dr. Bernard Malik is a bit busy with his commitment because we rescheduled the show. However, we are very thankful for Professor Pittman, Grant Pittman. He's with us, and ultimately, when Professor Grant Pittman is with our show, we would like to have a broader view of these protests or these struggles, how these struggles impact in past, and what could happen if these struggles does not go as per the expectation. Thank you, Professor Pittman. Let me start. Professor Pittman, you been busy making the policy in state so again, and plus you have your background is from the farmings. Our weekly show is about our farmers is our future. Now, as we already know that the last week there was a decision from the Supreme Court that also uh, go with the state, and state is not supporting the farmers. So in this situation, uh, how you are looking the settlement of the issue?
Uh, if the farmers have difficulties with the courts, they've got other options.
They got a option.
Yes.
Right.
In the Westminster system of government, and India is part of the Westminster system, there's actually three different areas. There's the government or the executive, which is made up of the government who control Parliament and they make laws and run the government. The second one is Parliament. Parliament makes the legislation, the laws to govern. The third area is the courts, the judicial side. If the matter before the court doesn't work out, they've still got the two other arms to make or to influence. So they can go to Parliament and make a petition and get support against the bill is another option. They could get support for an inquiry or a review of the bill and get members of Parliament to support that. They could get an alignment with other groups like union who could support them in further action. And they could also get the government to review their decision by trying to influence more politicians through their connections, their lobbies, their associations, whatever other groups they're connected to. So if the court doesn't help them, they've got other avenues.
Okay, now we will discuss in detail about the other avenue, but at this stage, within your experience, whatever your studies and you work for the politics also, in past also, do you have a similar situation in Australia? You share in last program that yes, there was some time, but again, does when the situation arises, state it on one side, farmers on other side, what is the role of the opposition?
Well, it depends which politician and which one's in power and which one are not in power. And the farmers are very influential in Australia and have been for well over 100 years. So if the farmers don't get the backing of the government, they will use their associations or I call them lobby groups, they're connecting groups like unions and other agencies that support them to help back them to get the laws changed. We have an advantage in Australia that one political party is totally supportive of farmers. So that's the National Party, it used to be called the Country Party. So there's always a group of politicians who will totally support the farmers. The other major parties, it will depend on what their policy is and their constitution. But in Australia, we have an advantage. There is one major political party that is supportive of farmers.
Right. Now, I was looking when I doing the exploring the data, and I find out there was in history there was a big farmer protest there, and then ultimately and they struggled very hard, and the result was not came as per expectation. There was a lot of oppression on this. In your knowledge, in your own knowledge, did you have the similar situation in any place of any country? And then, like let's say in UK or some other agricultural country like US, that the situation came on the same way, and how did they resolve that issue?
Uh, the bit of research that I've done is predominantly the Americans,
Right,
which was post World War II in the 1950s and 60s.
right,
And they tried to pass a lot of laws there to control the farmers and the marketplace and the prices and what the farmers were doing. And eventually they were able to pass legislation which supported the farmers. But for quite a long time, there was a lot of anxiety amongst the farmers about trying to control what they farmed, how they farmed, when they farmed, and the policies were not supporting the farmers. That's during the 1950s and 60s. And the farmers used their voice in Washington to influence first the politicians and then also the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats are a little bit harder to influence, but eventually they got the politicians to support them. And they call it freedom farming now, where the farmers have the freedom to make decisions. So America certainly has a long history of the farming community influencing policy. In England, I'm not quite as sure. Here in Australia, one of our founding parties, the Labor Party, was over a grazier issue. It was over sheep, the shearing of sheep. And the shearers had a strike because they thought they weren't being treated fairly by the farmers. And as a result of that, they formed the Labor Party in Australia. So it was actually an argument against the farmers by the shearers. So the Labor Party came into existence over a farming issue back in the 1890s. But we've had similar problems in Australia on sugarcane.
right,
It's been a major one. Cattle in more recent times.
right.
Certainly wheat has been another one, and certainly wool has been another area in the farming industry. So we've had similar issues here in Australia over 100 years across all sorts of farming industries, but never collectively all farmers like India.
Right. It's like in a batch and batch. Now coming back to a different concept, that the period says that last 50, 100 years is indicating that whenever something came for the farmers, there is still something very positive also, that it is for the betterment of the farmers. But unfortunately, it does not display, it does not present in this way. Do you think that ultimately by after 100 years, the farming shape will be changed? So, controlling or bringing them in administrating, there are always two debates. They are trying to control the farmers, or they would like to administrate the system. What exactly you are finding in these policy and struggles?
I think this, what's occurring in India is occurring right around the world, actually. And the issue is at the national level, they want prosperity, wealth, opportunities, development and growth. And some on the bureaucratic side and the politicians see that farmers may be limiting that as a nation. And they believe that the development of technology, training, education, better crop developments in terms of resistant to diseases and so on, the better use of the land, and the better management of how the product is sold, not only nationally but internationally, could benefit a country like India. So you have on that one side, they want to see that occur. On the other side, you have the farmers who see that if you go down that side, then particularly the smaller farmers, they may lose out because the larger farmers are getting the major benefits and they're not. And so they will want to keep change to a minimum so that they can still enjoy their current lifestyle. So the issue in politics is between the wealth and the advantage nationally against the individual benefits for the farmer.
Right. Now coming down to the controlling of the farming, do you observe that it is also a conspiracy theory that the landowner is operate like a bureaucrat, and then the farmers, the worker is like a worker only. So the control is always like with the hand of the owners, but does not have much benefit for the people, working people. If this is the true, then why these people are always interested to work in a farming? They can get the money they are serving. This if they are not the landowner. So what is the ratio of the landowner and farming in Australia?
Oh, look, that's actually changing. We have one of the best soil areas in the world near Brisbane, actually, called Gatton. It's called the Lockyer Valley. It's in the top 10 wealthiest soils, mineral soils in the world.
Right.
And in Gatton at the moment, a lot of the farmers are now from different countries. And a lot of the managers of the farms are of Indian background
Right.
and also of Asian background. So a lot of international migrants are buying the farms in what is traditionally a European farming area. Also, they have one of the biggest universities in Australia in that area who owns thousands of acres of farming land designed to develop new types of crops, drought-resistant crops, crops that will be managed by water management and those sorts of things. So the difficulty now is that the farmers are struggling to get workers onto the farms to do the work. Part of it's COVID, but part of it's the salary. The salary for farm labourers is not very good. And they tried to use people who are happy to do labouring type jobs. And it's generally not Europeans. For example, we hire people from Kiribati, from the islands. We hire Indian people. We hire labouring people who will work for very low prices to do the farming. So there's certainly a problem. If farmers don't make their money, how do they afford to pay the labourers to do the work for them?
Right. So when it's happening like that, that there is some land which is really very precious from the farming side. So and then there are rest of the area. When it's going to be discussed about the farm land, so that is going to have a similar concept about the like a construction square meter price of the square meter of the good land will be much higher than the normal land. And again, when this is the case, then the production from there will be produced in a cost rate and then sell in a cost rate. It's happening like that in the lands.
No, you're very right. The land in that area is very expensive.
Very.
And it is prime farming land. At the moment, there's an argument going on between the farmers and the railway department because the railway department wants to put another railway line through prime farming land.
Right.
And there's a huge argument going on between the farmers and the government over putting another railway line through land that is just for farming. And at the present time, there are representations being made by farmers to the federal government, to politicians, to stop the railway line going through their farming land, because the farming land's expensive. It's also unique in the world, and it produces high returns. And if you run a railway track through it, you lose hundreds of acres to a railway line. So there's a huge argument occurring in Gatton, which is just outside Brisbane, between the farmers and the federal government.
So now it means we can assume that if the land is a prime land, and then you are having a prime price for this one, so produce any farming on that land ultimately going to be sell in a different price.
Essentially, you're quite right. The price will vary then, and they won't get top dollar. And because it's some of the best land in the world, the farmers believe they're being severely disadvantaged, and they will lose potentially a lot of money on what may occur in the near future.
Okay, now one side we are looking that sometimes the policies are not supporting the farming in Australia and rest of the world. On the other side, I'm talking about now specifically for Australia, because there is a new technique, new technology, new laboratory, testing, and a lot of experiment the institutes are doing, and ultimately everything is done by the funding and grant from the government. Does the one side, if the policy is not supporting, but from the development side, does the Australian government is doing a lot of support, a lot of funding for the advancement skill, making some experiment and making a much easier production?
Australia has a major agency called the CSIRO, which specialises predominantly in agriculture. It does have some other areas of interest, and they work through some of the universities. This one in Gatton is the University of Queensland, and the CSIRO, the government agency, works through the university. And you're quite right, they're looking at technology, how to use technology, how to use machinery more effectively, how to get better food production per square metre out of the farm. Whereas before you might have only got one potato, now you get 10 potatoes.
Yes.
So a lot of money from the federal government and state government is put into the research area to improve the not only the farming techniques, but the food production rate on the farms. And in Gatton, and I don't know about India, but I assume they would have something similar. In Gatton, the university there is probably one of the biggest in Australia that specialises in farm production, farm development, and uses huge amounts of money, millions of dollars, to improve farming across Australia.
Right, that's very nice. So when the state is involved and they are putting a lot of money and doing something good for the farmers, today when people like you, Dr. Manar Malik, they spoke about the farmers, the question coming back from the people, from the state people, or those are against the farmers, they say, why now the people from the Thai suits are going to talk about the farmers? Now the issue is, I'm coming back to my question, that if the government is making development and a lot of things, it says that the farmer must be educated, that's why they can utilize. So does farming side, they are also understand the farmers, because you have the both caps, you have the policy cap and you have the farming cap also. So do you believe that the farmers are realizing that by the period of time, they must have a good understanding, good education, then they can have the good farming also?
Your question is a very good question. In the policy area, there is a strong argument that farmers struggle with education and modern research. And one of the major objectives in government policy in the farming area is to improve the education of farmers so that they can use their land far more effectively and efficiently. And one of the ongoing difficulties between the farmers and the policy people is how much do you educate farmers to deliver their product as against accepting that the farmer has years and years of experience and knows what his land's able to deliver. And this is the debate that I think India is occurring as well, that there's more and more research now showing that if farmers are educated, they can improve the productivity of their farm, as against the farmer who says, well, I've worked it for 40 years, it's been quite good. But when you've got a lot of people living in a continent that's shrinking a little bit because of your population, you want the farmer not to produce just 40 tonnes, but 80 tonnes of produce. And you can only do that through education and through better farming techniques.
Right. I just received a question from one of the viewers that in Asia, in India and Pakistan, and because it's related to the farming, but it's a slightly different question. So what happened in Asia, that the land owners is going to be give the farming land to any other party, and on they call it commission based or contract based, so they don't have to involve in the farming. Somebody else has to do the farming as an owner, and then they don't care how they generate the money, but they need their portion and rest of the one in there. Does this kind of system also operate in Australia?
Oh yes, very, very much so. The leasing out and hiring out your land and your machinery even, and your resources, that's very common here. So the land owner says, all I want is a percentage of your final income, and you can have the land, but it's yours to manage, but I want a percentage of what you earn. And quite a lot of farmers now will buy very expensive pieces of machinery, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, and what they do is they lease it out. So it might be 3 or 4 farmers buy it, and then they lease it out to 20 farms to harvest their crops or to manage their crops. So the technology and the machinery now is hired out. And also some areas, and like up in Gatton, the local council, the government up there at the local level, actually spend a lot of money putting in accommodation for farm hands or farming labourers, and they have complexes of hundreds of rooms. So the local government buys and puts into place basically huge complexes, and then the farmers can take advantage of that. So they become a third party to the farmer, not necessarily to the owner, but to the farmer at a reduced cost, because the accommodation is being met by the government in the local area.
Right. Good. Now coming back to okay. Then coming now in our side, coming back to the Thai and then protest. Do you think that the protests which they are taking place, the educated people are supporting the farmers, and the people from the government, they believe that how the Thai people with the tie and coat is going to be support the farmers?
One of the and India was probably similar in many ways to Queensland back about 30 or 40 years ago.
Right.
And 60% of our production was from the farmers. And there was a lot of strong support from the politicians and from the different classes in our society, including the universities and the government funding. But then when mining arrived and tourism arrived and and sciences arrived, what I call research, then the farming started to lose its status,
Right.
particularly with the mining. And all of a sudden, there were other interests in the country. And the politicians went from farming across to mining. And so the miners had more strength than the farmers because the mining was bringing in more revenue than the farmers. So there was a shift in government from supporting the farmers across to supporting the miners. And that has occurred here in Queensland and in Western Australia to a large degree because they got huge mining capability. So it depends what's occurring in India. If there's movement with other industries becoming very influential in India, the politicians may be supporting them as against the farmer.
So it means, does it is possible, now we are going back because we are in our last 5 minutes to our program, going back to the Indian situation, and we'll see in next week that what's happening basically. So coming back to your first suggestion that there are two other ways still possible available where they can talk to the parties and again and engage the people. Now in this case, you just mentioned about that other industries also. So other industries, if the other industries are going to, or other stakeholders, industrial stakeholders going to be help them, and does it might help them for solving the problem, the one part. And second part is that because now after the Supreme Court decision, the struggle is getting more hard and dry. You know, then what will be going to be situation in this case?
Look, I think the farmers have got more options yet, which I haven't heard about, but maybe doing something on. But in any political problem that's occurring, you'll always find advocates and adversaries. The farmers will probably be identifying who their advocates are. And that may be people in the unions, it may be other farming groups, it may be international support, it could be the suppliers of agricultural equipment even could come in and support. So they're increasing it from 60% of the population to 70 or 80% of the population by bringing in all their supporters. So they'll be looking for their advocates. Also, if the judiciary arm doesn't accept what they're putting up, they've always got other options. For example, they can always put a petition to the parliament. In other words, signatures of millions of people saying they don't support the bill.
Yes, that's a good idea. Nowadays, really a good technique, yes.
Yep, so that's a common practice. So they may be preparing a petition to the parliament. The other thing they can do is see if they can get parliament. There will be different committees in parliament. I'd imagine there'd be a committee which reviews agricultural expenditure or agriculture. And they'll probably try and get the chair of that committee to see if they would hold a parliamentary inquiry or a review of the legislation. That's another option they can also do. Another one is they can approach the universities to see if there's more research or information which shows the policies may be defective, and actually put up review papers to the bureaucrats and show that their policy has 6 weaknesses in it. And the professor in agriculture from the Indian University has said your policy has 6 major issues that haven't been addressed and will cause further difficulties, not only for the farmers, but for the nation of India.
Perfect.
So they may go and get some of the top academics in India who specialise in agricultural policy to give the government papers which show that their policy is defective. That's another technique they can use to, and that will influence the bureaucrats, the government officials. So there's quite a few options they've still got that I think they could try and have an impact in India yet.
Thank you, Professor Pittman. I think today program was much about that what next could be, because our farmers are our future. It is happening in India. It can happen in Pakistan. It can happen in Australia, and as a democratic countries, it is a part of the system. But Professor Pittman has really expanded the area and create and suggested more wider areas where parallel many things can be done, which ultimately going to impact on these. So I believe, thank you, Professor Pittman, and thanks, viewers. I believe that today's program was more interested in terms of understanding that if the situation arises for any system, any protest anywhere in the world, there are many institutes, not only farmers. For every protest, there are still systems and people and institutes are available. Those can be utilized, can be helped. And one of the best suggestion which Professor Pittman has mentioned about that, you can have a survey and you can include all over the world the people, and especially the top academic people. They can change the same bill and they can find out many discrepancies on the bill, and ultimately that's going to be advised to the government that there are many possibilities that it might be not supportive to the farmers as well as to the government. Thank you very much. We will come back to the next week and we'll see how the progress is moving of this farmer efforts. But at this stage, we feel very pain. That's why Professor Pittman spared his time, Dr. Bernard Malik spared his time and energy, and people from Brisbane, Australia, all over the world are trying to support the Indian farmers, because the struggle is really going to be hard and there must be a way, for a best way for the farmers. I think next week, we are hoping every week is the better week for our farmers. Till then, it's goodbye from Shoaib Zaidi. Thank you very much, Professor Pittman. And it's over from Shoaib Zaidi, and it's over from 72 News. Thank you very much, sir.